Okay, here we are again. Welcome to your spiritual journey. It's wonderful to have you with us today. Uh, we are headed into this next part of our fifth season. So it's nice of you to like us, to subscribe on YouTube, or whatever you can do to support us. We are still asking that if you'd like to be on this podcast with your spiritual journey, feel free to go to our website, yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com, and leave us a message as to why you think other people would be interested in your journey. So today, our special guest is Michael Glaspie, aka Mike G. Mike began his sales and marketing career at the age of 22 when he obtained his real estate sales agent license in Michigan in 1973. He quickly became the first buyer broker in the state of Michigan, where he worked exclusively with investors and the acquisition of investment real estate. So just after 14 years, he was able to retire completely from the business, owning in excess of 300 investment properties. However, retirement didn't suit him very well. He had enough of fishing every day, so in just 90 days, he started from scratch a nationwide telecommunications company called BNC. It only took him 18 months to get offices in all 50 states and more than 77,000 independent representatives. So he was able to market that pretty well, but just after a decade of tremendous growth and success, technology, as it usually does, with many businesses, rendered Michael's business model obsolete. So he sold off the customer database and retired for a second time. Again, he failed at retirement and soon found himself marketing on the internet, and he quickly became an influencer, and he just went crazy with network marketing opportunities. He quickly became known as a recruiting monster in the trade. Sadly, in 2018, Michael got caught up in an internet scam, which ultimately cost him his fortune and his reputation, which has now brought him to a new spiritual awareness and his recent publication of I Talk to God. And you can see a mock-up of that here on the table if you're watching us on YouTube. And the subtitle of this is Amazing True Stories of an Ordinary Man. And Michael would like to share that with you today. So, Mike, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, and you can give us some of the detail from what I just exposed our audience to.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. I very much appreciate this opportunity. For me, this is about legacy, which will become very clear soon. And for the listener, this is about discovery. Let me begin with these prepared remarks, Dr. Bob. By the way, not long ago, I did not need to write everything down, as cue cards would have sufficed, but I will explain that soon. What if you heard these words? What if one day you heard these words from your doctor? I'm sorry to inform you, you have a terminal illness. There is no known cure. And based upon average statistical data, you have 48 to 68 months remaining life expectancy. What would you do? It's an honest and serious question, don't you think? What would you do? Would you begin making plans for that trip you never seem to have the time or money for? Would you call your family and loved ones and give them the news? Or would you keep it to yourself so as not to cause others any pain just yet? Would you make it a point to attend those backyard barbecues more frequently or begin attending those family get-togethers? Would you? Would you call other doctors for a second, third, or fourth opinion? Would you begin writing letters to everyone you can think of, those people whom you may have harmed, asking for their forgiveness? Would you call or write letters to all those you can remember who have caused you harm in some way and forgive them? Would you see a lawyer and make certain your last will and testament is up to date, or create one if you have not done so yet? Would you? Would you buckle down and begin that to-do bucket list? Things that you somehow never had time for. What would you do? I can tell you this, whatever answers to these questions you are now telling yourself, in all likelihood, what you really would do is probably very different from what you are thinking you would do right now. We all share a common destiny, all of us. We all have our own unique me in the equation. We all have our own story inside of us, a story which needs to be told. We all want to be remembered somehow once we are gone. It matters not what you did or things that you did not do or accomplish. It is the story of your who that matters. Nothing more, nothing less. It happened to me. You see, in late May of this year, 2023, I sat quietly in my doctor's office, holding tightly to my wife's hand, and I heard those words. The doctor gave us the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. She informed us that I was likely afflicted 7 to 8 years ago. She told us I have, on average, based on statistical data, 4 to 5 years life expectancy. During the first 80% of that time, I will lose first short-term memory capabilities. This is in progress now, and why I need to write all of these things down. Then long-term memory. That is the who I am and the who you are. Then followed by the loss of cognitive abilities. That is the 2 plus 2. And the final 20% of the remaining time here in this existence, I will lose my automatic nerve system abilities. So in the end, in agony and unable to communicate this, I will simply stop breathing and slip away. Jokingly, I tell my friends, I can teach you how to make a great BLT. I just cannot tell you with absolute certainty if I had one for lunch yesterday. In fact, now, as fate would have it, in preparation for spine surgery number 6, I was required to go through a number of tests to determine surgery suitability. So recently, a spot on my lung was discovered. More testing is needed, and even though I quit smoking those wonderful Cuban cigars nearly 15 years ago, the man upstairs seems to have plans for me as a guest for dinner sooner rather than later. So I have been busy doing many of the things I have asked you to consider. What would you do? What would you do? I'm doing them now. In 2017, I actually wrote most of, which has now become known as, I Talk to God. Amazing true stories of an ordinary man. The book wherein I share my story with the world. In I Talk to God, I even discuss at length my role in what has become known as the Mike G. coin deal. At this site, jot this down, please, www.italkedtogod.com. italktogod.com. I describe this book in considerable detail. For example, I begin with a lengthy preface, where I discuss how I became involved in a scheme where I invested my own money, over $100,000 for 6 months, before I ever told a single person about it. And how ultimately the Department of Justice presented me with a plea agreement, which in the end saved considerable more serious charges under the should have known legal concept, a concept for a man like me never likely I would have prevailed upon. And then a deal which ultimately also saved others from indictment and prosecution. So I signed it. The preface in I Talk to God all by itself, I believe, is a fascinating read. And then I begin with the first 10 chapters relating candidly and openly my personal experiences with my God. I hold nothing back. I may have you laughing, I may have you crying, but in the end, I promise, I commit to you, I will give you proof there is another existence after this physical one we all currently enjoy. Only recently published on Amazon, this book has already received about 100 5-star reviews. If you don't mind, I would like to share with you just 2 or 3 of those reviews. Mike, thank you for sharing your new book with me. It was an easy and enjoyable read. I read it straight through. A few things that stood out for me. First of all, it glorified and honored our Creator and God Almighty. It was not religious at all. It was very inspirational. Though a Christian believer for 52 years, I found that your book helped to restore fresh hope and faith in my life as I read it. It allowed me to learn more about you. I have admired you and respected you since I first became acquainted with you about 3 years ago. After reading the book, I wish that we could have met and shared our appreciation for the goodness of God. Your book is a blessing to me, and I will share it with others. You remain in my prayers, and I believe in you. Godspeed. Mark Campesi. Hi, Mike. What a fascinating journey, and thank you for the courage it took to share this in writing. I found myself sharing some of your trials and tribulations and your discovery there was something out there larger than yourself, that you and I were merely actors in a much larger play whose script had been written before we were born. I have long believed that we are all on a journey, that our relationship with God is different, that he talks to each of us and makes himself known in ways that we understand, but others may not. Sometimes he talks to us directly via powerful thoughts that appear out of nowhere. Oftentimes he speaks through others, but how he gets our attention is unique to us, and our relationship with us is personal. His relationship with us is personal. Thank you again, my friend, for sharing and confirming what I have long believed. Phil Bastian, author, ULC minister. Mike, your book was so good. Thank you for your transparency. I appreciate the privilege of being one of the first to review your book. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed hearing the background where God brought you from and into where you are now. It was very inspiring, and I'm grateful that you are giving all the thanks to God. This book will inspire many people to look for special things from a supernatural God, rather than just expecting simply from the natural realm. And the last one, if you will allow me, please. Hi, Mike, a story of hope. Thanks for sharing your personal stories of tragedy and triumph. It clearly shows how life has twists and turns, presenting us with seemingly insurmountable problems. It gives validation to using God or higher power for help to overcome these issues. While we are seemingly doing the right thing, tragedy can strike and turn our world upside down. So true. Turning to a God gets us back on track. Having personally known you for the last 47 years, I know you have always believed in everything you did and looked for ways to help others too. I hope you continue to do so. Yours forever, Michael. Forgive me. Folks, do you have a list? Do you have a following on any of the social media sites? Might I suggest you join Amazon's affiliate program? I can give you the link here on this video, but I think best that you just visit italktogod.com and you'll find the affiliate link to join Amazon. They don't pay much. It's only about 4%. However, I promise you, your audience will thank you for suggesting this book. You know, I suppose just like everyone else, I too want to be remembered. I want my story to come from me, not from those who assume they know the truth. They think they know the man behind the name Mike G. I think I'm entitled to this, don't you? I'm determined to get my message out. It's not about my reputation. It's about the truth of God. I share in great detail stories I personally experienced in my talks with my God. And I am now, because of this remarkable personal past of mine, completely and totally at peace with my future. My sole purpose in telling the story of me is to help all readers and those they know find this same level of comfort in knowing the truth of God. In fact, I will accept no personal income from sales of I Talk to God. Profits due me will be sent to AACR, that's the American Association for Cancer Research. I invite you to help share this message with the world. A message of comfort, a message of joyful understanding, a message of have no fear. I have been told by others who have received a review copy from me, yes, including the audio version, the poem in the audio version is quite moving. I hope you find it also. I will share that poem with you in just a few moments. In the final closing chapter, all formats, I invite readers to submit their true story, your true story, for publication in future books, all in the series, We Talk to God. Amazing true stories from ordinary people. So volumes 2 through 10 will be published, and in the book, I give you an email address to submit your personal talk with your God for publication consideration. Obviously, I will not be around to complete this important work, and I'm okay with that. Truly, I am. People tend to be afraid of the dark only because they do not know what the darkness holds. Knowing what awaits, what the darkness holds for all of us provides a degree of comfort I want to share with the world, and I hope you will help me accomplish this goal. And I Talk to God. I shine the spotlight on this darkness. The website, italktogod.com, tells more, much more, including all the links to Amazon for each format, the ebook, the printed version, the audio version, and the hardcover version. And bear with me, please. Here's a poem which has been my guiding light for over 50 years, folks. A source of direction and inspiration and my guide to a successful life. It was written by Sam Foss way back in 1876. Never copyrighted, so it's in public domain. Therefore, you can use it at your discretion. I also give you this poem in the audio version, not the printed version. So here goes. One day, through the primeval wood, a calf walked home as good calf should, but made a trail all bent askew, a crooked trail as all calves do. Since then, 300 years have fled. I infer that calf is dead. But still he left behind his trail, and thereby hangs my moral tale. The trail was taken up next day by a lone dog that passed that way, and then a wise bellwether sheep pursued the trail o'er vale and steep. and drew the flock behind him too, as good bellwethers always do. And from that day o'er hill and glade, through those old woods, a path was made. And many men wound in and out, and dodged and turned and bent about, and uttered words of righteous wrath, because 'twas such a crooked path. But still they followed, do not laugh, the first migrations of that calf. And through this winding woodway stalked, because he wobbled when he walked. The forest path became a lane, and then bent and turned again. This crooked lane became a road, where many a poor horse with his load toiled on beneath the burning sun, and traveled some 3 miles in one, and thus a century and a half. They trod the footsteps of that calf. The years passed on in swiftness fleet. The road became a village street, and this, before men were aware, a city's crowded thoroughfare. And soon the central street was this of a renowned metropolis. And soon, and men 2 centuries and a half trod in the footsteps of that calf. Each day 100,000 root followed the zigzag calf about, and o'er his crooked journey went the traffic of a continent. 100,000 men were led by one calf near 3 centuries dead. They followed still his crooked way, and lost 100 years a day. For thus such reverence is lent to well-established precedent. A moral lesson this might teach, were I ordained and called to preach, for men are prone to go it blind along the calf paths of the mind, and work away from sun to sun to do what other men have done. They follow in the beaten track, and out and in and forth and back, and still their devious course pursue to keep the path that others do. They keep the path a sacred groove along which all their lives they move, but how the wise old wood gods laugh who saw that first primeval calf. Many things this tale might teach, but I am not ordained to preach.
Well, that was lovely. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Thank you.
Okay, you're ready for questions.
I'm ready, my friend.
Okay. Well, I did finish the online version of your book last night.
Thank you.
And there's quite a story to be told there. In fact, more than one story. I think there were 6 separate stories that you told. And there's, I guess what resonated with me the most was that sense of connection to your God. And one of my questions is, I'm sure that it wasn't necessarily immediate for you as things happened, but it evolved over time that you made the connection between quite a few of these that made you put all this together, I guess, as one continuous story even though it's broken up into six of them. That first story was back in 1978 when you decided to quit alcohol totally. And is it fair to me, fair to you for me to ask you some questions about each of these different stories?
Certainly may, of course. Yes.
Because we still want people to read the book, but so you had, from what I read, sort of reached your limit at one point with alcohol, wanting mentally to uh, divorce yourself from that desire, and try as you might, that it just didn't seem to work. So can you talk about that experience a little bit?
It had gotten a hold of me. As I think, reflecting back, I fell into the alcohol addiction as an escape from my previous life as a young man growing up in the environment I did. And when my son was born, I had by then become a full-fledged alcoholic. I jokingly tell people, Dr. Bob, I'm a retired constitutionalist. I used to take the fifth every day, a fifth of vodka every day. And my business was starting to flourish, and I just couldn't stop not at 5 o'clock punching the time clock, metaphorically speaking. I've never punched a time clock in my life, but at 5 o'clock I would close the door, lock the store, hang a sign, I'm at the bar, right? And this went on and on and on. And I knew deep down that I had to quit. I had tried to quit. I couldn't quit on my own. I couldn't cut back. One drink became 10 every time. And that's a typical story, a common story that you will hear from alcohol addicts. I had just been elected as trustee in my township, a 4-year term. In fact, I was successfully elected for 2 4-year terms as a trustee in my township in Michigan. And the very first meeting I attended, I was blitzed. I was drunk. I tried to hide it, but my words were slurred. I knew that. And I went home that night in shame. My first meeting, being introduced to the audience of people who had frequently attended the live township meetings, I just knew it, and it was just a very low point in my life. And I prayed that night, probably harder than I ever had, asking for help from my God. And I use the word my God because I think and believe that God is different to everyone. We all have our own interpretation and what God means to us. I prayed, Dr. Bob, and I prayed. And you know what happened the next morning when I got up? I did not want a drink. The thought of drinking repulsed me. That 5 o'clock came, and the urge to lock the store, close the door, hang a sign, I'm at the bar next door, repulsed me. I did not want to do it for the first time ever. To this day, I have not had a drink since that day in November in 1978. I won't even allow wine to be used in cooking. It's just the thought of all of it, any part of it, repulses me. I conquered it, but I conquered it with the help of the man upstairs.
Now, when you talk about praying at that point, you talk as though you had a prayer life, like that wasn't the first time you prayed in your life. Is that correct? You did have a prayer life of some kind.
Of
So,
course, yes, I did.
so in your upbringing, what was your relationship to church and religion and God? How did that come about? Did one or both of your parents make sure you got to church once in a while, or how did that happen?
My mother was the inspiration for church, Dr. Bob, and I grew up going to a Pentecostal church, and not on a regular every Sunday basis, but on a frequent basis. And I have fond memories of those times with her. My father never attended with us, but it was her guidance and her inspiration that kept me on that path, if you will.
So you had previously established some kind of relationship to God uh, through that church, then?
Yes, yes, I did. Yes. He's always been my buddy.
So you continued that as you were successful in business, and uh, because I guess one thing that I thought about as I read that particular story was frequently people end up in Alcoholic Anonymous, and they, from that relationship, deepen their relationship with their maker, and at that point, uh, when they've enriched their relationship to God, they're able to give up alcohol. But you didn't go that route. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. It was miraculous. It was immediate. It was overnight. It was flip the switch.
Yeah.
I never needed to attend an AA meeting. I never needed to seek counseling with anyone. It was just the next day, the world was different for me.
Yeah.
And that can only happen one way.
Now, skipping ahead a couple stories, uh, you went through a similar process with smoking then at one point.
Uh-huh.
And in your efforts to quit smoking, uh, was it a quicker transition to say, "Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll just pray about it because that worked before around alcohol," or was that a slow process coming to that conclusion?
Yeah, I wasn't wise enough to have, recall the miracles of 1978, and maybe the desire to quit smoking was not as strong, was not so important to me. But ultimately, I reached that decision, and again, I had to reach out to the man upstairs to conquer that addiction. A lot of people, Dr. Bob, and I think you probably are very aware of this, and I've learned this over time. About 10% of humans have that, it's called the X gene, a propensity to be an addict to something. And when you have it, you can, when you are born with that X gene, you can easily become a drug addict, an alcohol addict, a smoking addict, an addict of anything, an addict to gambling, and all of those vices. And about 10% of our population struggle with that. And it just seems an impossible thing, whatever your addiction is, to overcome. And I discovered that I could overcome these things with prayer, but I needed to realize that, and I ultimately did.
Well, it's there's something more, I think, beyond just prayer, because a lot of people pray for a lot of things, but there's something about your particular connection, I think, that it isn't necessarily unique, but a bit different from the average prayer, because often those prayers are like a wish, but somehow you need to follow up that prayer with total faith or total something, total turning yourself over and saying, I can't do this alone. I need your help. And I think you used you used those words.
You have to ask for the help, but then you must be prepared to do your part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, kudos to you for that. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Now, some of your other stories involved synchronicities where you seem to appear in the right place at the right time with the right boat.
Amazing, isn't it? Isn't it amazing what happened?
And those stories reminded me of something that happened to me. My wife and I were stranded in a forest in the middle of the night, and somebody appeared driving their truck going through that same forest in the middle of the night. We had a flat tire and I had no tire iron. I couldn't change the tires. And this person stopped, got out of his truck, said, let me change that tire for you. Changed the tire, got back in his truck, and drove away. Refused to take money, wouldn't tell us his name, and we just forever have called him our angel. And
Hmm.
you in your experiences appeared to be an angel for a number of people. So if you would, whatever about those stories you'd like to reveal now, uh, you can put on your angel wings and let us know about it.
I guess all I can say about those events, I was blessed, and frankly, I feel those people were blessed that somehow, I was there. Somehow. And I was there in places that I should not have been. I was there in a place on Lake Michigan that I should not have been able to see that boat in distress. It was just too far away, and dusk was upon us. But I was able to, and it was just for a millisecond that that visual connection was made, and then it was gone. But I knew something was there. I saw it, just that millisecond. It was 2 miles away. The lake was alone, empty. It was 10 o'clock at night in July, late that time of the year, Eastern time zone, far western part of the Eastern time zone. In Michigan, it was almost dark, and a storm was coming, and you could feel the winds coming out of the east, and that boat was in serious trouble had someone not been there to help them. And somehow I saw that boat. I should not have seen that boat. Somehow I did, and ventured over and gave them a hand. And I give all the details about that in the book. And it was just amazing to me. The next day I thought about that. How was that possible? How did I see that boat? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. The other
So,
story, another rescue, here in Florida, I was with my attorney at the time when I was president of the Michigan Rental Housing Association. He was the attorney for the association. And a broker who worked for me as an employee, he closed my transactions for me. I invited them both to come and join me in Florida for a week. And we were out on a small boat in the intercoastal, a wide part of the intercoastal where two rivers join. Wind was just howling, but we were on the lee side of a peninsula, so we were away from the wind and the waves fishing. And out in the wind, out in the current, out in the waves and the current and the cold, the boat had capsized. And in this boat there was a rowboat. There were two men. And if you ever hear the voice of someone who is dying call for help, you'll never forget it. It has a sound all of its own. Thinking back, those words came from a man who was in his 80s, I think. And by the time I got to him, just seconds later, I talk about those details in I Talk to God. He was going under for the last time, and just his hand was up for the last time. And my attorney grabbed that arm. And then the three of us pulled him over the side, wrapped a blanket around him, put him in the bottom, and raced back for his son, a man in his 60s who was also in the water and beginning to struggle with those waves. But he was in serious trouble, and the waves were in a river, probably 3-foot waves. And that's unusual for a river. Just to give the listeners an idea as to the strength of the current and the wind. It was a blustery day, and I shouldn't have been out there. It was a dedication of passion, I guess, to go fishing that put me on that water, put me out there on a day that no other boats are out there. That little rowboat and my boat were the only boats in view, and in this location in the river, you could see 3 miles to the east and 4 miles to the west, and not a boat in sight, just the two of us. I shouldn't have been there. I was there.
yeah. So as you related this second story from Florida, you mentioned in your book that you felt like your God was trying to tell you something, and that's why both of these incidents happened about a year apart, because you were trying to be given a message, and this happens to many of us, we don't get the message until we're hit over the head with it and finally say, okay, I get it. This is what you're trying to tell me. So what is it that God was trying to tell you with these life-saving messages?
The big answer, I'm here. Listen to me, I'm here. I'm here for you.
Okay.
That's the message I try to convey in the book. There should be no fear, as I have said, of the darkness. When you have that knowledge, when you are confident in that, there is no fear. I can face the darkness without that fear now.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take you way back to 1988. And sometimes I think this isn't fair with someone who's got Alzheimer's to to take you back, but they're in the book, and these are stories that you've told and stories that you know pretty well. There was some difficulty in your communications with your daughter, and suddenly all that changed. So, how did that come about?
Amazing. Just amazing. I think every father, I would imagine most anyways, and with an adolescent teenage daughter, there's always strife, there's always a challenge there. And that was my life, my relationship with my daughter, who was 14 or so at the time, was not unusual. Many people experience that. And the tension was always there. The determined father, the overbearing father, the guy who bangs the gavel and says, "This is how it's going to get done, and you better do it my way." So, we were at the kitchen sink doing dishes after a Sunday meal, the large pots and pans that don't fit in the dishwasher. And something happened to us. First through her, she felt it, and then I felt it. It was as though some force had passed through us. And she looked at me and she said, "Dad, did you feel that?" And I was stunned that she would say that to me. I was trying to put it together, what had just happened. I confessed to her, I did, sweetie, I did. And after that simple, single event, that I said simple, that's not what I meant to say. Amazing, amazing. After that amazing event, our relationship changed, Dr. Bob. Overnight, it just changed. There was no strife and stress or tension between us anymore. It was gone. For the listeners to understand a little background of this particular home that I have purchased from my family and on several acres and developed it into a horse farm for my wife. I purchased it from a husband and wife, a man whose daughter had, at about 14 years old, hung herself in the garage. She committed suicide. Of that home. And thinking back on that event, thinking back on that part of my life with my daughter, I have become convinced with my relationship with the man upstairs that that young girl saw that tension between father and daughter and came to our rescue. And somehow that energy that passed between us caused all of that strife to just melt away. I am just stunned about that even to this day.
Yeah. So you made the connection between that young girl's suicide and perhaps the spirit of her that was still hanging around to mend the relationship between you and your daughter. And what do you see as the connection between that spiritual experience and God, or your God?
Boy, that's a hard question. You ask some tough questions, Dr. Bob. You know, I think my God just wanted us both to know He's there for us. I think it helped me, although I was already well along the path of conviction. I think it helped me understand even more clearly His presence in our lives. And my daughter does too, from that day. She and I have talked about it a few times. And she remembers it fondly and as something that was just so wonderful and yet so impossible, and yet it happened.
Yeah. Well, boy, we've chewed up all our time already. This has been very interesting. At the end of each of my podcasts, I invite the guests to leave our audience with a couple words of wisdom. So you have about 2 minutes if there are some words that you'd like to leave the audience with.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. I thank you for this opportunity to share some of my story, my life, with your audience, your listeners. And I talk about this in the book. Excuse me. I wrote this book to tell my story, but with a bigger meaning, a bigger reason than that. I wanted to, as part of my legacy, I wanted as my legacy to tell people there's no reason to be afraid. I think, in my past growing up and my earlier years, like most people, I think probably just about everyone, we are afraid of death. Let's call it what it is. I now face it squarely, and yet I am not afraid of it. I can accept it. So my message is this. My message is there is something after this physical life. There has to be. I've proven it. I know it. That being the case, what is there to fear? What is there to fear? Death is part of life. That is more than just a statement now. That is more than just a phrase. That phrase has real meaning. It's the next step. It's the next thing that we experience in this wonderful transition from this existence to the next.
Okay, thank you for that. Audience, as always, take what you will from what you've heard, what resonates with you, put the rest on a shelf until you're ready for it, and then pull it down. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.